Hey friend, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Now lately I've been on a birthday card kick, so I'm going to bring in the birthday basic stamp set and share even more fun DIY birthday card ideas. I'll have links down below to everything I used, and using those links helps support me, but if you want to use what you have at home, I'm still sharing tons of stamping tips and tricks throughout today's video that you'll find helpful. So without further ado, let's get into it. What I love about the birthday basic stamp set is there's a lot of versatility in here. We have some really large birthday icons in here that you can use to fill up a focal point on the card, and then some really great background builders like these balloons and the sprinkles. But then I also am obsessed with the sentiments because they're nice and large, so again, you can really fill a card nicely. But then these sub-sentiments are great at sort of completing the thought of the sentiment, which I love. So let's start off by doing a little bit of background building. I'm gonna start using the sprinkles stamp. I love this one because it's kind of a border strip that you can use in several colors to build out a background. I'm gonna peel it out, and then I'll apply it down to a large acrylic block. Here I'm using my large Simon Hurley Create acrylic block, but you can also use a stamping tool if you find that helpful. Okay, so if you want your background to stand out more, we're gonna do it on some stark white cardstock, and I'm gonna go in with some colors that I want to match whatever image I'm using later on. So here I'm using some reds moving into pinks, and I'm just going to start off at the bottom with my darkest color, which I'm using Game Over, and I'll just stamp it down, giving some good pressure, and we'll lift that off. You can see that stamps really beautifully, and we're starting to create our background. Like I said, what I love about this strip is that it's kind of thin, so we can do it in several different colors to build up a full background rather than having this be a full background stamp. So then next, I'm going to go in using a little bit of Love Struck, working my way up. I'll overlap them just a little bit, and then again, I'll stamp it right down. There we go. Next, I'm moving into Bee Sting. So I'm working my way up using lighter colors as we go up to create kind of an ombre effect. And again, I'll flip it, overlap it just a little bit, and then stamp it onto my card. And what I love about my Simon Hurley Create inks is they do lots of different techniques well, but they still stamp beautifully too. So it's not just a technique-based ink, which I really like. And lastly, I'll go in here using Rosy Cheeks, which is my lightest color I'm going to use, and follow that same process to stamp it down on the card. So here we built out a really nice background that's got this cool ombre going on. I love the texture of the sort of sprinkles or confetti. And then we've got a great spot to put our focal point and have some nice contrast between the white and the colored area at the bottom. So this stands out really nicely, but I also wanted to show how to make a background in case if you wanted it to blend in a little bit more and not be really a focal point. So here I'm going in using a little bit of Game Over ink, which is that nice darker maroon color, and I'm going to go on just some red colored cardstock. All right, and what I'm going to do is just follow that same technique by doing that stamping, and this color is just a little bit darker than the red cardstock, so it's just going to create a nice tone on tone effect. And here I'm going to use the same color all the way across because it's got a little bit of contrast compared to the cardstock, and it will build up our stamping really nicely. So I'll continue stamping up my card just like I did with the last example to create kind of half of a background there. Stamp this down. So this one is really cool. It offers a more tone on tone effect, so it just adds a little bit of texture while having the background kind of blend in, whereas this one adds a lot more color and makes the background sort of stand out, so you can kind of choose whichever one you want to use when you're doing your stamping for your card. Personally, in this example, I really love the colors here, but that's just me. I like kind of a bold and graphic look. So to make the focal point here, I'm going to use the cake from the stamp set. I'm going to ink it up using a little bit of VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink to get a really nice jet black and crisp image. So we'll stamp that down. And then to finish off the cake, there's also a little floral in here. Since we used all those red and pink colors, I wanted to make this a little bit more girly and add the floral along with it. So we'll stamp that down, and there we go. And that black ink takes a little bit longer to dry, so to set it, I'm just throwing over a layer of clear heat embossing powder. And the layer of embossing also helps to stay inside the lines while we're doing our watercoloring. So I'll heat set this until it turns clear and shiny. Okay, so I've pulled out lots of different colors that I want to use of my Simon Hurley Create inks, and I'm just going to take them and smoosh them down onto my craft sheet. So this is going to be a protected work surface that creates a really nice palette of color that I can then use for my watercoloring. All right, and I thought I would share some watercolor tips as we color this in. So I'm starting off by just laying down a layer of clear water. And this is just to help get the cardstock ready to take the color. Because if you just lay the color right down onto the cardstock, it's gonna sink right into the cardstock right away and not be able to blend. But having this water down gets the cardstock kind of ready to take the color a little bit better. And then we can go in with our inks and start doing our watercoloring. Here I'm starting off with the cookie dough color, and this is a super light tan color. It shows up a little bit better in person, so I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see it on camera, but it's this really nice color that's gonna create a great sort of vanilla cake for us. And the less water we use with this color, the more it will sort of show up on the card. So if you want the color to be a little bit darker, just use a little bit less water. And then to add a little bit of shading, I'm gonna go in with some darker colors. So here I'm using a little bit of Gur, and I'm just gonna put this all around the cake to add a little bit more depth and dimension to the color. And then if you want to blend lines out a little bit more, just use a little bit of water and it blends out and is very forgiving. All right, so I'm sticking with that kind of monochrome pink color palette. So for these candles, I'm gonna go in with the lightest pink color and watercolor them in. And again, I'll start with a sort of lighter wash of color using a little bit more water. And then I'm gonna go in with less water and more color. And this is how we can add some nice shading and dimension to the image. So less water is gonna give us a more saturated version of the color. So we can use the same color on top of each other and still get a darker, more shaded effect. All right, then I'll use a little bit of Love Struck at the bottom, which is this sort of darker berry red color. I really like how this looks. All right, and then for the cake stand, I'm going to use Shady, which is this really nice dark gray, almost black color. I'm going to really water it down at first, and I've already added a layer of water down, and then I can just add a really light wash of this color all over the surface. So this really shows you that you can get so much tonal variety with each one of your ink pads, because then I'll go in with more of the color and less water, and watch this. You guys can really see how much shading and depth you can get with just one color. Less water, and we'll get a way darker version of that color. Super cool how that works. And then again, if you've got a harsh line, just go in with a little bit more water and blend it out. And even though we're using lots of water to watercolor these, I'm actually just working on my stark white cardstock. I'm not using watercolor cardstock, and it still takes the color really beautifully and blends out well without pilling. So I really recommend this cardstock for all the techniques and this sort of watercolor. Then again, we're digging back into the coordinated die set to find the dies that match these. Then I'll bring in a little bit of mint tape and rip off a few pieces, and we'll line up our die with an even border all the way around the edge. And the reason why I love the mint tape for die cutting is because even under all of the pressure that the die cutting machine adds and really adhering this tape down to the surface, it still doesn't rip my cardstock, which I really love. I haven't found many tapes like it. All right, then we'll run this right through our die cutting machine. All right, then we'll pop the cake up on some foam tape, and we're gonna have it overhang just a little bit over top of that colored backdrop, but that's a really great way to spotlight the image. And then I'll bring in this little flower that's on some foam tape as well, and I'm going to pop that up on the side of the cake. And I love this because it embellishes a little bit more. It allows it to be more masculine or more feminine, or you could use it for like events like weddings if you change up the colors a little bit too. All right, then to stamp down the sentiment, I want to make sure it's perfect because we don't want to ruin things right at the end of the card. So I'm placing it down in my MISTI, and I'm going to use the sentiment that says bring on the cake. So we'll place it down. It fits really nicely kind of in that groove there. And then to make sure that it's lined up, I'm just using the grade on my MISTI, and that looks great. And to ink it up, I'm going to use a little bit of Love Struck, which again is that really nice berry red color. And I like that we have this in our MISTI because the sentiment is pretty solid and I want it to be nice and dark. So we're able to stamp it in the same spot several times to make sure that it's perfect. And it's stamped pretty good, but I want to do it a couple more times just to make sure that it's nice and bold so that it really stands out. That's what I love about the MISTI. It makes it super easy to do that. And there we have our really nice sentiment. I love it in that bright red color. Usually I make top folding cards, but for this one, I'm making a side folding card. So I'm gonna go in onto my stark white cardstock, which I've cut in half horizontally. And then I'm going to go in and score it at 4 1/4. I can flip it and then fold it down in half to create our nice card base. And here I'm using the Score Buddy along with my Teflon bone folder to create a really nice crease on this thick cardstock. And then to finish off the card, I'm going in onto the white cardstock, and I'm using the same Love Struck color that we stamped our sentiment down in. I just think the edge needs something a little bit more to help it stand out. So this color is going to add a really nice pop of color to the background. And doing this makes it so you don't have to waste colored cardstock to add just a little border of color, and it completely matches the project as well, which I really love. And nobody will know that we didn't blend the center. All right, then I'll line everything up and adhere our card panel down onto our colored card base. All right, here's a closer look at that finished card. I really love the background that we were able to stamp down using the stripes of confetti or sprinkles, and that watercoloring turned out just beautifully. I absolutely love it. I want to show how to make another background that's really tone on tone but has lots of detail to it. So here I'm going to use the Candles Layering Stencil set. This one has 2 stencils in it, and it creates these beautiful candles. I've been using this a lot as kind of a focal point on the card, but here I want to show how you can use this in the background as well. And it's all just about changing up the colors that you use. So to do my stenciling, I'm actually using the stamp wheel. I've really loved this sort of photopolymer surface in here, as you guys saw in my latest video. So I'm going to place down a piece of really light blue cardstock right on here. I'm going to place it down, and it's that nice sticky surface, so it's going to hold it in place beautifully. And I'm using a little bit of breakup blue for this. So it's really going to be tone on tone. You can see it's nice and light, and it's not going to take over the background. So for this, I'm going to use that first stencil, and you guys saw in my last video that when I'm using my Sam & Hurley Create stencils, I want to put the glossy side towards the matte, okay? Because otherwise it's going to end up ripping the coating off your stencil. It's something with the way that my stencils are made. They're super thick, and they've got kind of a coating on the back. So in order to keep that coating, place the glossy side down towards the sticky part. And then I'm going to go in using a little bit of breakup blue ink and my domed foam blending tools, and I'm going to do some blending. And what I showed you guys in this last video, if you want to check it out, I'll have the video and the stamp wheel linked down below. But I think it's going to be one of my favorite surfaces for doing ink blending on, because it really is a hands-free experience. Like, the stickiness on the photopolymer really holds this down super well for when you're doing your stenciling. And so I'm just going in with a light hand. You can see this color is giving a very tone-on-tone effect as I'm blending. And it's just going to make these candles still have all of that beautiful detail, but have them blend sort of into the background of the cardstock. All right, so once we're done blending this first layer, we can lift off our stencil. So there we have those candles started with our blending. And then when it comes to the next stencil, that's a layering stencil set, again, I'm going to flip it over, and because both of them are backwards, it'll match up really nicely. So we'll just line up the stencil how it's supposed to go, and we'll lay it down. And most stencils can be used upside down like this. There's really no right or wrong way, unless if it's matching up with an image. So just keep that in mind. And then I'm going to go in again using the breakup blue and blending this in. And so it really is all about the colors that you use. This is a really great lesson. Like, if you want things to stand out, again, use, colors on top of white. But if you want it to really blend in, doing a sort of tone on tone effect like this can be really helpful. So if you think something's a little bit too busy, try tone on tone, and it really helps to sort of have still texture and detail in the background, but not have it overpower the focal point. So then I can go in and lift off the top, and there we can see we have the beautiful detail of the candles, but again, it's going to sort of blend into the background and let our focal point really shine. I love how that turned out. To clean any excess ink off the mat, I'm going to spray it down, and then I'm going to take a paper towel or a lint-free cloth and just wipe this down. It's a photopolymer surface, so you want to clean it off, and my inks clean off really easily off of here without staining. And then once we're done with that, I'll place back on the acrylic block piece, and we can set it off to the side. And if you guys know me, you know that I love to add a little bit of dimension to backgrounds as well. So I can't help myself from just going in, and I'm going to use that same exact color for, again, a tonal effect that's a little bit darker than the cardstock color, and I'm just going to ink blend around the edge. And when I do this, it's really helpful to kind of add some dimension to it and then really draw your eye into the center by making the edge a little bit darker. So it really helps to highlight the focal point, which is going to be in the center of our card, which is where it's going to be lightest. It's a super easy step, but I think it adds a lot of dimension in the end. All right, with the second example with the cake on it, I thought that I would go in and show you just how to make it more masculine. Since the last cake card was very feminine, I thought all I needed to do was just change up these colors and show you just how easy it is to make a card for a guy as well, because I know lots of people ask about that. So here I'm going in with the candles, and since the background is blue, I want to keep it pretty monochrome, so I'm going in with this No Diving color, And then again, I just used less water to add a little bit of shading onto the candles as well. And for the bottom frosting here, I'm going in using a little bit of Midnight Snack, and I'm just going to color that in as well. So you can already see it's a lot more masculine just by changing out the colors. Then I'll do the same thing with this cake stand using a little bit of that shady color. I really love how versatile this color is because again, the more water you add, the lighter it's going to be. And then when we want to go in and add our shading, we just make it a little bit darker and add some color around the edge to add some depth and dimension onto the cake stand. And if the lines are a little bit too harsh for you, again, it's very forgiving, and all you need to do is add more water to blend it out. Last but not least, we'll go in and do the flames of the candles with a little bit of shooting star. Then again, we'll go in using the coordinated die to easily line it up and run it through our die cutting machine. All right, pop this out. I truly love these dies because it saves so much time in cutting these out instead of having to fussy cut them out. All right, I've added on the cake, and then to finish it off, I want to stamp down a sentiment, and I love this wish big sentiment to go along with all of the candles and the birthday cake theme. So I thought I would stamp it in the open space right above these candles. So stamp it down in some black ink and give it some good pressure. Perfect. I love how it turned out, and you guys always ask for masculine card ideas, so I hope you enjoyed seeing this one. It's all about just changing up the color scheme and making it work for you. So for the next background, I want to use the sentiments from my stamp set. This can be a really fun way to build a background and highlight some of the words. I find this especially helpful for like birthdays if you have a set with lots of sentiments, because all of the sentiments are kind of themed the same way. So I think it's a really fun background you can create. So I'm just going to take the different words in the set and add them all onto different acrylic blocks. If you were stamping them all in one color, you could kind of add them on together like a puzzle. But since I'm doing them separate colors, I want to lift them up on all separate acrylic blocks. And then you can start your stamping. I like to start out with the biggest sentiment first. So I'm going to do the Bring on the Cake sentiment. And I'm going to ink it up using a little bit of Prom Queen ink. And then you can stamp it straight like this, or you can add it on a little bit of an angle. And I love adding these sentiments and backgrounds at an angle. I think it just adds a little bit more interest. So I'll stamp it right down. And then we'll bring in some of our smaller sentiments to sort of fill in some of the gaps. So here I'm going to ink up the happy birthday sentiment using a little bit of Guppy ink, and we can sort of fill it in. So this one fits really nicely next to the Bring on the Cake sentiment. It kind of fits in that gap right there. And then I'm going to stamp down Wish Big using the Clear Skies. And this one fits nicely in this gap. So it works out really well, but just sort of kind of interlock the sentiments and fit them together as you're stamping your whole background. All right, and then I'll bring in the Celebrate sentiment, and I really like this one because it fills in some of these gaps really easily. Since it's only one line, it's a little bit easier to fit into some of the open spaces. All right, and then I'll just continue inking up and stamping down my stamps all over this background. I like to do it in separate colors like this too, so I really like these kind of bright neon colors that we chose. But the reason why we do it in separate colors is because when I'm stamping down like this, they're all pretty close to each other. So having them in separate colors at least still makes them legible. Whereas if you had them all in one color, everything would kind of blend together and just look a little bit like gibberish. So in most cases, it's pretty easy to just kind of keep stamping down the sentiments and finding places that each one of these words are going to fit. So I'll just bring in the sentiment that says Bring on the Cake and stamp it down several more times along the background. And then again, like I said, this one-line word like Celebrate is going to be really helpful in case I need to fill in any of the areas. And so right up here, I'm just going to fill it in with one last Celebrate sentiment. And that completes off this background really nicely. Again, I love the different words in all these different colors. It makes them easy to read while still building a nice collage on the card, so we can put a focal point to finish it off. And then of course, if you want to, you can stamp all the sentiments in the same color to create a stripe like this. It's a little bit harder to read, but that might be better for you if you want them to kind of blend into the background more and not stand out as much. It just depends what you want to be the star of the show. All right, for the focal point, I'm gonna use a little bit of Lunar paste and create a background that we can stamp our focal point on. So to do this, I'm just going in using some of the colors that I used in the background in the matching color of Lunar paste. So here I'm using a little bit of Slippery When Wet, which is close to the Guppy color that we used, and we'll spread it out over our stark white cardstock. And what I love about this stuff is you can use it on your finger and just make a really thin layer of the color. So here I'm spreading it out just to make my own sort of metallic colored cardstock. and it dries super quickly when you use it like this too. Then I'll wipe off my finger in between colors and it cleans off really nice and easily as well. And you can move on into the next color, which happens to be Prom Queen. Again, I'll dip my finger in, but if you don't want to use your finger, you could also use blending tools as well to get a very similar effect. I find that I like to use my fingers though because I have a little bit more control when I'm trying to blend and mix in between the colors like this. And then last but not least, we'll go in using a little bit of Clear Skies, and I'm gonna try to blend this into the Prom Queen. And you wanna work really quickly. This color was already kind of dry, so it didn't blend fully in between each other. But the quicker you work, the more it's gonna blend in with the other colors and create a nice new color in between. So here you can see it's blending a little bit and creating a nice purple color in between the blue and pink. All right, and I'm just gonna heat set this using my heat tool, mainly because I'm impatient because it only really takes just a couple of minutes for this to dry, especially when it's applied so thin like this. Like that should probably be good already. And I just love the color and shine that we're able to get because if you used a regular metallic cardstock, it's not blended together like this with a beautiful ombre. So that's what I love about being able to make your own using Lunar paste. All right, then to make my focal point, I'm going in using a little bit of VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, again to stamp a nice jet black image. And I'm just going to ink it up and then I'll line it up exactly where I want the color to be underneath. So I'll just stamp this right down, giving it some good pressure. And when we lift it off, we have a really great image. And to set that black ink in place and make it permanent, I'm going to go in using a little bit of clear heat embossing powder, lay that over top, and tap off the excess. Then I'll heat set it until it's clear and shiny, and that's going to set that black ink in place and make it completely permanent. Before we heat set it, if there's any excess stray powder, we can go in with a dry paintbrush and just swipe any of those excess powders away so they don't stick where you don't want it to. So once that's heat set, it's completely smudge proof and permanent on top of that Lunar paste. So in order to stamp on top of the Lunar paste, I would always put clear embossing powder and heat set it to make sure that ink is going to be nice and permanent since it's a slick surface. And there's a coordinating die for the present in the die set as well. So I can just go in again using a little bit of mint tape, make sure this die is nice and lined up with an even border all the way around the image. And then we can tape it down to hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And that cuts out the image perfectly, so simple, and I love that Lunar paste background underneath the GIFs. Then I'll add these GIFs on some foam tape, and I like having a line where that background breaks because it gives me a great place to put the focal point image and have it nice and spotlighted. For the sentiment, I want to use Celebrate, but I want to have it kind of bending over top of these presents. So what I'm going to do is take the Photopolymer stamp, I have my acrylic block on top of the image, and I'm just going to line it up and place it kind of how I want it to be above the GIFs with a curve like this. I think that should be pretty good, and that looks like it's going to be perfect. So I'll ink it up using a little bit of VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, and then we can stamp it right down onto our card. So don't forget that your photopolymer and rubber stamps can bend like this to create a little bit more of a unique look for your sentiment or your image if you want it to kind of wrap around something. I think that's so cool having it go around those GIFs. But then just make sure that when you're done stamping with it, you kind of pull it off the acrylic block and straighten it back out. You don't want to leave it in that position that it wasn't meant to be in. All right, and there is the finished card. I love this background, using the sentiments in the stamp set in a unique way to create a nice colorful background. And then also making that Lunar paste background for the focal point image with those GIFs really makes it stand out and shine against all that beautiful color. I love how this one turned out. It's super special and I cannot wait to give it to a friend. All right, and lastly, I want to go in using the balloon from the stamp set and create a background of stamped balloons. So there are lots of images in this set that can be used as both focal points or background builders, which I find to be really helpful. It's a super versatile set, like I was saying. So I'm going to start off with one of the colors. Here I'm using Guppy, and I'm just going to go in and ink up the balloon several times and stamp it down all over this background. I'm going to stamp some higher, some lower, and I'm going to do probably about 3 of each color I'm going to end up using along this background. So just stamp them down and make sure that some are going off the edge. It just helps to create a more cohesive scene. Then I'll clean off my stamp with just a little bit of water and we can move on into the next color. So next I'm going to use a little bit of Prom Queen, which goes really well with this orange color. And these are translucent dye-based inks. So that way when I stamp them and overlap them, it's going to create a really great new color in between. So there it creates a little bit of a darker orangish color. And that's really fun because balloons are see-through, so you're going to be able to see them kind of overlapping. And that's the fun of this card you can kind of overlap them and create new colors in between. All right, here I've already broken my rule. I'm gonna stamp 4 along this background to fill in some of the space. But again, like the sentiments we were doing earlier, it's just sort of puzzling in the background until you think that it looks complete with that color. All right, next we're going in with a little bit of Psych. I love this color. It's one of my favorites from my line. It's a really nice kind of yellowish lime green color. And I'm just going to, again, overlap things so that they create beautiful new colors in between. So I'll overlap that green and orange together. And then again, keep inking it up and then stamping all over the background until we think it looks pretty filled in and complete. And really, I've got to say, as I'm stamping this, like, props to my ink pads. They really work well for stamping, and I'm getting a really nice image because this balloon is a super solid stamped image. So like I was saying, it's one of the things I love about my inks is that it's so versatile that you can, blend really well, stamp well, and watercolor with it. So it makes them a really great all-around ink pad. All right, and last but not least, we'll go in using a little bit of Clear Skies. I'm gonna ink that up. And then we'll use this color to sort of fill in any of the blank spaces. And you can see this is where it gets really fun because as we fill in more spaces, it tends to overlap more of the colors and you get such beautiful tones in between. So I recommend going with a color scheme similar to this if you can find similar colors, because as they overlap, like, all of these create great blends. You get a nice purple in between the blue and pink, and you get a nice green in between these two. And this is probably supposed to make brown, but it doesn't really look too bad at all. All right, and then to finish this off, I'm just going to, once again, fill in any of the blank areas by just stamping a little bit off the edge. And like I was saying earlier, like, stamping off the edge just kind of helps complete the scene and make it look like you weren't just stamping on the card, but that it's really flowing off the edge there. Part of me wants to stop and part of me wants to stamp one more right here. And I think I'm going to. I think it just needs to be more evened out and have them kind of both end at a similar spot. That looks great. All right, now to create a focal point for this card, I'm going to use the same exact image, but instead of stamping it directly onto this background, I want to create a little bit of dimension. So I'm going in using another piece of my stark white cardstock. I'm going to go back in with the balloon image, and then Triple Berry, which I think is going to complement the rest of the colors that I use really nicely. It's this beautiful warm tone purple color. And I'm just going to go in and stamp, I think 2 to 3 of these balloons will look great to finish off this card. So just go in, ink these guys up, and then we'll stamp them down. And again, we're just getting really great solid images with this stamp set. I love it. And I've never used this image before either. I didn't even have to condition it or anything, and we're getting some great stamping. And with the stamp set, you can also purchase the Birthday Basics die set, which is made by Spellbinders. And this coordinates to cut out lots of the images in the set. It has one for the balloon, which you can either use to cut out the lined or the solid image. So here in this case, we're using it to cut out the solid image. So I'm just going to use a little bit of mint tape. And to cut this out, I'm just going to line up this die, make sure there's a nice even border all the way around the image so that it cuts out with an even border. And then we'll place down a little bit of mint tape. Then we'll run it right through our die cutting machine to cut it out. All right, so we'll pop this right out and it cuts out perfectly with a nice even border. And then we'll use this to die cut the rest of these balloons. All right, then I'm going to add a little bit of dimension to these. So I'll just line up the balloons where I want them to go, and we'll add a little bit of foam tape on the back to pop them up. And this is going to complete the background and make them stand up, add a little bit of dimension, and really finish everything off nicely. So I'm just sort of filling in some of the little gaps that were left as we stamped the other balloons. And like I said, that little bit of dimension really makes a big difference. And then I'm going to flip this over and just cut off any of the excess that hangs off. But like I said, hanging off the balloons makes it seem more realistic and like the background is flowing nicely. Then to finish off with the sentiment and make it stand out nicely, I'm gonna do a little bit of white heat embossing onto my black cardstock. So I've added down my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to ink this up with a little bit of Versamark clear sticky ink, and we'll stamp it down onto my black cardstock. And I'm just using the bold happy birthday sentiment. And then we can go in and throw over a layer of white heat embossing powder. I'm going to tap off any of the excess. And I also like to blow a little bit on it. I find that it gets rid of any of the excess stray powders. And then we can heat set this until it's nice and bright white. And you can see once that powder is heated, it gives such a great contrast against the black cardstock. I just love it. And then if you guys have seen my videos before, you probably know that I like to go around and fussy cut out the sentiments, leaving an even border all the way around it, instead of just leaving it on a rectangle cardstock. I find that this gives a little bit more of a finished look to it, and also it doesn't take as much space up on your card, so you can see more of the beautiful background that you've created. And to do this, I just go in with my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors. These make it super easy because they spring back out at you so your hands don't get tired as you're cutting. Alright, so I'm going to adhere down the sentiment on a little bit of foam tape to make it pop up, and you can see that black cardstock really makes it stand out nicely. Now, like I said, I love the little sub-sentiments in the stamp set as well, and I really like this one that says, "Hope your day is as amazing as you are." So I'm going to pull out that sentiment, add it onto an acrylic block, and I'm going to stamp it down using some black ink. So here I'm going in using some VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink. I'll ink this up, and then I'm going to line it up right below my other sentiment, and we can stamp it down nicely. And I think that finishes off the sentiment really nicely. And like I said, it sort of completes the message and makes the card a little bit less generic. I really love how those sentiments are. All right, I'm going to adhere this onto a top folding A2 stark white card base, and it's the same size as the card base, so I always like to start in the top corner, then I'll move along to the other side. So you want to line up that top edge first, and then it pretty much aligns the whole card. But this way, in case if there's any overhang on the edges, we can cut them off. But you want to make sure the part, like the fold, that can't be cut off is perfectly aligned. All right, and here's a closer look at that finished card. I really love how this came together. And then again, those bold sentiments can really stand out. And I also love the sub-sentiments to finish it off and make it a little bit more meaningful. All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and seeing those stamping tips to create these easy DIY birthday cards. If you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. Also down there is a full supplies list to everything I used. And again, using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon in another card making and crafting video. Have a great day. Bye.